Thanks everyone for attending today's workshop. We are going to give it a few minutes, um, folks to join, but we've got quite a busy slide deck here, lots of material to go through today. So we will jump in shortly. I've been, like many people, it seems, struggling with a cold. And so I apologize if I have to stop and cough, or I might turn my camera off and blow my nose at some point during the workshop. I don't think folks want to watch that, so I will turn my camera off there. Um, but today we are talking about our draft 2025 Section 120 report. As we'll talk about in a moment, this is a biennial report that we do under Washington's 100% Clean Energy Transformation Act. It discusses utility bill assistance programs and other energy assistance programs, and looks at data on low-income energy assistance need, among other things. I'm joined by Glenn Blackman today, who is the head of our policy office, and I'm going to turn it over to Glenn now to give some introductory remarks. Take it away, Glenn.
All right, thank you, Austin. Um, as Austin said, I'm Glenn Blackman. I'm the director of the Energy Policy Office here at the Department of Commerce. And I want to welcome everybody today to this workshop number 3 for the Section 120 report process. And I want to thank everybody among the utilities for the information that you've supplied so far in for us to aggregate and capture the energy assistance programs and plans that are being developed and that we'll report to the legislature. It's a lot of information, and we want to have it as complete as possible so that we can provide a full picture of the energy assistance programs that are being offered by utilities today. And then I also want to encourage everybody to look at the materials that we're presenting today in kind of the spirit of it being a draft. And, we're working on it. It's a set of topics that we've already discussed a lot over the last few years, but we have to do it again every 2 years. And so if you could take a look at what we're presenting here and help us to accurately reflect the state of the energy assistance programs and policies, and where the weak spots are, where the strong points are. It just would be really helpful if we could have your open-minded, constructive type review of the materials that we're proposing to share with the legislature. I think that will ultimately help the legislature a lot, if we're able to show them a wide range of well-vetted thinking on this. So anyway, with that, I'll turn it back to Austin, and we can get started with today's work.
Thanks, Glenn. So let's see. So here we are. This is the Department of Commerce that Glenn and I work at. We happen to work in the Energy Policy Office, but our agency administers over 100 programs that cross all the different topics you see on your screen here today. Now, for today's agenda, as I mentioned, we've got a lot to go through, but there's a lot of material here that we've been working on together for quite some time, and we've been updating the data here. So we want to present that to you all, and then after today's workshop, we will be posting all of the materials that underpin this work. and so that you can review it and help us, as Glenn mentioned, provide the best information to the legislature. So we'll look at the legislative report mandate, our principal energy assistance laws, cover some of the topics around energy burden assistance need, disproportionately impacted communities, and look at our electric utilities and their energy assistance programs and what they've done over the past few years and where they say they are headed. That I hope to cover relatively quickly. So I'm not going to save a whole lot of space for discussion. That being said, people please unmute, jump in into the conversation as we go. If you have questions or thoughts or comments, that we'll really encourage that. And then we'll talk about gaps in existing statutes. And then we will get to the part around additional mechanisms for assistance. This includes mechanisms that would supplement the policies already on the books in the state law and supplementary funding for utilities. We'll then talk about statewide monthly low-income energy assistance program design, and finally, funding mechanisms. And then we will wrap up by talking about three preliminary findings that we're hoping to have a discussion around and see what people think. So we've got a lot to cover today. And as a reminder, as Glenn said, the data that we will be presenting is preliminary. We continue to review the Section 120 data reported by utilities. The numbers may move around marginally as we finalize the data set, but I think we've got pretty close to the final numbers to present to you today. Okay, so Commerce is required under Section 120 to aggregate information into a statewide summary of energy assistance programs, energy burden, and energy assistance need. We must identify the current expenditures on energy assistance and evaluate the effectiveness of additional optimal mechanisms for energy assistance, including but not limited to customer rates, a low-income specific discount, system benefits charges, and public and private funds. The law also requires us to assess mechanisms to prioritize energy assistance towards low-income households with a higher energy burden. And this report must be updated on a biennial basis. So taking a step back, we're going to step into first talking about the principal laws that are on the books, and then we're going to move through some of our data. So as a reminder, the first real law around energy assistance came in 1979, which gave permissive authority to public utilities to provide energy assistance to low-income seniors. That law was broadened a number of times, and in 1998, it included all low-income households. Back in 2019, as part of our 100% clean electricity law, which looks to ensure an equitable distribution of benefits and reduce risks and burdens to vulnerable and highly impacted communities, including low-income households. The legislature passed Section 120, which is referring to RCW 19405-120. And that statute required that electric utilities offer at least 2 low-income programs. It defined low income as the greater of 80% of area median income or 200% of the federal poverty level adjusted for household size. And that was put into Rule WAC 194-40030 for consumer-owned utilities. And it was also adopted over at the UTC, the Utilities and Transportation Commission, for our investor-owned utilities. The definition of energy assistance includes bill assistance, energy efficiency and weatherization, and demand response programs undertaken to reduce energy assistance need. Now, utilities submit program data to Commerce on a biennial basis, and utilities conduct assessments of their own programs and submit those assessments to Commerce. which we turn around and submit that report with all the details we've just discussed to the legislature. Now, there's also RCW 8028068, which was enacted as part of multi-year rate plans legislation for investor-owned utilities. It requires them to propose low-income discount rates to the UTC after seeking input from advisory groups. And then these programs must be delivered with community action agencies or other community organizations and with streamlined eligibility rules. So those are the three principal laws that form the backdrop of the report and the utility programs today. Now, from the data that we pulled from these different pieces under Section 120, we are pairing that with Department of Energy Low-Income Energy affordability data from their low-income energy affordability data tool, the LEAD tool. We use data from the Department of Health and Human Services regarding their supplemental nutrition assistance program. We pull data from the Residential Energy Consumption Survey administered by the Department of Energy and other data from literature reviews on this topic. Now, as Glenn mentioned, we've had 3 public workshops, comment periods, and we've held 3 data advisory group meetings, which is a group of utilities and low-income advocates who come together and help me sort through the data, and that undergirds what we're looking today. And then, in addition, we have the work that we've been doing over the last 2 years, first on the first low-income energy assistance report, and then the statewide low-income monthly energy bill assistance report as well. So what do we know about energy burden and assistance need? Well, according to the Department of Energy Low-Income Energy Affordability Data Tool, there are more than 275,000 low-income households in Washington, about 25% of all low-income households in Washington that are energy burdened. That is, they spend more than 6% of their household incomes on residential energy bills. The amount they spend above that 6% annually is roughly $1,016. The total statewide energy burden amounts to $275 million. And that's the amount, again, that's above 6% of household income, doesn't include the home energy costs below that 6% of household income. Now, this data is pulled from household responses to questions about their actual home energy cost. Therefore, these amounts reflect the extent to which our state's electricity rates are lower than electricity rates in some other states. It also reflects bill reductions from assistance programs on the household's home energy bills around the time of the survey. Now, if we look at the data by urban and rural counties, there are 178,388 energy burden low-income households in urban counties. The total energy burden is 180 million in those counties. The number of energy burden households in rural counties is much smaller, 92,528, and their total energy burden is correspondingly smaller at 95 million. However, our rural counties and rural households are disproportionately energy burdened. So in urban counties, 1 in 6, about 17% of low-income households in urban counties are energy burdened, while 38% of low-income households are energy burdened in rural counties. So on this table, which admittedly has some pretty small print, You can see I've selected a handful of counties here that kind of illustrate the dilemmas in the different counties. So the top of the table, the first 5 or 6 counties here, shows the where you should look really is at the number of households. So you see in King County, for instance, there's 53,220 households that are energy burdened. You can see the percent of low-income households that are energy burdened, that's 17%. The percent of energy burdened low-income households out of total population is 6%. The average energy burden is 1,188, and the total amount is over $63 million. Now, you can see a similar trend where across these counties where the number of households is great and the total excess energy burden is great. But the percent of low-income households that are energy burdened and percent of energy burdened low-income households out of the total population are relatively small compared to the counties at the bottom of the table, which are some of our rural counties. Here you have smaller number of energy burdened low-income households. So that's this second column here. And then but the percent of low-income households that are energy burdened is much higher, and the percent of energy burdened low-income households out of the total population in those counties is much higher. The average energy burden is around the same. So this one, if you're looking at just these ones here, they're slightly higher than some of the urban counties, but overall, they're all somewhat in the same ballpark. But the total excess burden from these counties is much smaller compared to the urban counties. And we will kind of come back to this data later on when we're talking about funding and challenges rural utilities may face in funding low-income energy assistance programs. So what do we know about these numbers here? We can see, these numbers. Okay, so their household energy burns above 6%. What does this mean? How does it impact households? Um, from some of the data that we've looked at, both here in Washington State, national data and regional data as well. We know that energy burdened households are more likely to receive disconnection notice, experience involuntary loss of electric service and inability to operate indoor heating or cooling equipment, forego basic necessities such as food and medicine to pay their electric bills, are more likely to lose housing, uh, they're more likely to leave their homes at unhealthy temperatures, which is correlated with negative health outcomes such as higher levels of asthma in children. And they're more likely to pay their energy bills by borrowing through credit cards, payday loans, and other financial products that push households further into poverty. The data also suggests that not only are low-income households disproportionately more likely to be energy burdened, but Black, Indigenous, and people of color are more likely to be energy burdened and experience the energy insecurities mentioned on the previous slide. And so goes for renters and rural households. Now, Commerce did a survey back in 2022 in King County. It was a relatively small survey, 46 households, and we will post this survey summary online. Um, but I just wanted to grab a few of the quotes from households and what they said about low-income energy assistance. The first 2 quotes here highlight the benefits of energy assistance to these households. One says it helps them not get sick because of a cold house, so they're able to afford energy to operate their home heating. The second one talks about the struggles of being a single mother with a disabled child and working all the time and still feeling like you're not getting ahead. And so that assistance helps them a great deal. Um, and the next one highlights a household that wishes they had energy assistance so that they could use their funding or their money for to support the kids' education and warmth. And then the last two here suggest, disenchantment with the system as it is. Um, and if here the quote is, if it were a reality and not just a promise, it would help a lot to be able to buy more food for my family. And then another that says, we'll never receive any help. Support and assistance programs are not for everyone. These kind of resources are not for minorities. So those are some higher level comments about the social service system and people feeling discouraged in seeking assistance. Now, these comments are just a few in the survey, and we'll post that online. But I think it helps illustrate the impact energy assistance can have for low-income households and the challenges that low-income households may face in accessing assistance. So, moving on, let's talk about what programs are available to households and our electric utilities in the state overall. So, we have three investor-owned utilities in the state, and they serve about 44% of residential electric utility customers. The Utilities and Transportation Commission regulates investor-owned utilities in the state and has broad jurisdiction as their economic regulator. I think we got those twice there. And for consumer-owned utilities, there's roughly 24 public utility districts, 17 municipal utilities, and 17 cooperatives providing electricity to retail customers. They serve about 56% of residential electric utility customers in the state, and they have their own locally elected governing boards and are primarily self-regulated under their respective statutory frameworks. So, according to the reports that we were collected from utilities, mind you, we did not have all reports. I think it's 6 utilities, we'll see later, did not report to us. We were able to kind of look on their web pages and patch together at least this information, so they're not totally missing from the data set. But some of the other data, like their program participation rates, we do not, our program participation, we do not have. Mind you, they're all very, very small programs or small utilities, and most of them do not have programs. But there are 86 utility bill assistance programs in Washington spread across the 50 50 plus utilities in the state. 5 utilities do not offer bill assistance of any kind, and 16 do not offer utility fund bill assistance. They only offer donation programs. Roughly half of the utilities that offer assistance offer monthly bill assistance. And so that's about 40%, I believe, is the number there. And then 22 utilities or 40% administer bill assistance programs and do not offer monthly bill assistance. So I'm confused that they're 60% on the others. All right. Most utility programs, most utility bill assistance programs are 85%, and monthly bill assistance programs, 81%, do not match that definition of low income set out in state law and administrative rule. As we covered earlier, that is the greater of 80% of area median income or 200% of the federal poverty level adjusted for household size. Now, most bill assistance programs, 65%, and the monthly bill assistance programs of 80% have non-income eligibility criteria that restrict access to households that meet additional that restrict those access because they place additional criteria on eligibility. And if you look at all the programs based both on whether they match the definition of low income set out in state law and administrative rule and do not place any non-income eligibility restrictions, there are only 3 utilities that are then utilities that have programs open to all low-income customers. Those 3 are the investor-owned utilities that are regulated by the UTC. So now let us look at a few of the rationales that we hear at Commerce often hear from utilities. The first is that the statute in Section 120 says that utilities must demonstrate progress in providing assistance. And so they are starting out by having income eligibility criteria lower than the state law and administrative rule, or are placing additional criteria on programs. From Commerce's perspective, it's unclear how that squares with the requirement in the statute to make programs and funding available to low-income households, which includes all the households up to the state law and administrative rule definition. We also hear folks point to the statute the part of the statute that says utilities should prioritize households with higher energy burdens, but it's not clear that the restrictive eligibility standards necessarily give priority to households with higher energy burdens. And then the final one is that utilities were unaware of the definition. I think for context here, Commerce waived the first round of reporting for utilities to provide an additional 2 years for them to comply with the statute administrative rule. The state auditor's office notified utilities in December of this discrepancy and held individual meetings with utilities over December, January, February, and March. And then only a few utilities have updated their definitions to date, and most of these utilities have left other restrictions on programs in place. And it should be mentioned too that the statute has no requirement to offer bill assistance or monthly bill assistance, more specifically to households. I'll stop there. Second, before we proceed on to more data. Still getting used to my new workspace. I spilled my emergency all over. Fortunately, missed the keyboard. All right, we'll proceed. So here's an example of the differences in low-income eligibility criteria. And how they may in fact limit the number of households eligible. Seattle City Light is one program where they've offered 70%, they've put their income criteria at 70% of state median income, which is higher than the 200% federal poverty level, but lower than 80% of area median income, which adjusts for the higher cost of living in Seattle. Here you can see that with the household family size of 1, 80% of AMI in 2023 was around $70,000, where the state median income was around $44,000, leading to a difference of about $26,000. So households in between that 70,000 and that roughly 44,000, would not be eligible for bill assistance. And then this adjusts for household size. So if you had a household of four, the difference does shrink to about of around $101,000, and $85,000 is what's set by the utility under the 70% state median income. That's a difference of about 16,000. And that's just one example here. Mm. Um, And then this here is an example of looking at the differences in programs that utilities are offering. And this just looks at Pierce County, not the state as a whole. You can see here that you got 12 utilities serving Pierce County. And um, you can see their rough locations here and the number of households that they serve. Uh, and then you can see in this column the number of low-income programs that they offer that are bill assistance programs. This includes donations. The second column here does not include the donation programs. And the reason for that is donation programs are insufficient to meet energy assistance need. They're pretty small programs that provide one-time assistance. They're good at they may be good at alleviating emergency need, but they're not they don't provide sustained assistance to households. And so we look at just those, and then we then filter for programs without any sort of non-income eligibility restrictions. Then we look at the programs and filter them for whether they match state administrative rule and state law around definition of low income. And then we look at whether they meet, whether they have no, if they're open to all low-income customers, which means there's no additional non-income eligibility restrictions, and that the programs operate with definitions that match state law and administrative rule. And we see as you go across here, the number of programs getting smaller. In some cases, there's no programs available today. And then and by programs, I'm referring to bill assistance programs. And so you can see here the variety of programs and lack thereof. And this is what we often refer to when we talk about the state as a whole, which Pierce County is kind of a microcosm of. When we talk about a patchwork of programs where there are gaps in the programs available to households. Stop there for a second. I am trying to keep us moving because we got a lot to go through, but folks who do want to jump in, please just jump in. Not So again, these are preliminary numbers. I do want to check in with a few utilities about their numbers, so these could move around a little bit. But in 2023, what we see in the data is there's 168,997 households being served by utility programs. We make that determination by trying to figure out well, we take the midpoint of the total number of households reported by program, and then we look at what if it's the case that every household in the that's being enrolled across these programs may be a duplicate, and then we take the midpoint between a duplicate count and an unduplicated count and come up with this number. It's not significantly different from the total. And then that compares to using the same methodology, that compares to 166,911 households in 2020. In 2023, utilities spent 85 million in total costs on their programs, compared to 95 million in total expenditures in 2020. Uh, in 2023, those expenditures resulted in 51 million in bill reductions. This should be put in there. And compared to 69 million in 2020 bill reductions. And I think that decrease is because utilities are spending more money on energy efficiency programs than they were back in 2020, possibly because of the pandemic limiting the ability of utilities to operate those programs at that time. Now, what we did to kind of put these numbers in perspective is we benchmarked the utility program participation with state-administered programs with similar eligibility criteria to utility program participation by county. So, well, we did it overall and broke it down by county, taking the information that utilities submitted to us about their program participation by zip code, aggregating that to county data, and having DSHS produce a report of unduplicated data on SNAP participants by county. So what does duplicate and unduplicated mean? Duplicate counts mean that a household could be enrolled in multiple programs and be counted twice or three times. And there is no way for us on a zip code basis to take out duplicate counts of utility program participants. For the SNAP data, they are individual households. So it's if there were 4 people registered for SNAP in one household, there would only be a count of 1 because it's one household, not one participant in the SNAP program. So overall, we could see overestimates in utility program participation. We also took a look at utility program participation out of the total eligible population. So again, we have our definition of state law and administrative rule, which defines low income as household incomes that do not exceed the higher of 80% of area median income or 200% of the federal poverty level adjusted for household size. Now, in most cases, 80% of AMI is higher than 200% of the federal poverty level adjusted for household size. However, in a few rural counties, 200% of FPL is higher than 80% of AMI, particularly for households that are kind of above, a number of household members above 4. So let me rephrase that. Household sizes with 4 or more people, often in rural counties, their income is greater. The FPL, 200% of FPL is greater than the 80% of AMI definitions. But what we did is we just took 80% of AMI from the DOE lead tool, which is data from the American Community Survey administered by the Census Bureau. It's 5-year data spanning 2017 to 2022. And compared it to the 2023 utility program participant data, which is what this slide says. Again, we have duplicate utility data, so that can lead to an overestimate of utility program participation by county. And so what you see here is, if we focus first on the table, I've just selected our most populous counties to look at. The report details all of the counties, but they're all in this ballpark or below. When we look at the duplicate 2023 utility program participants divided by the unduplicated 2023 SNAP participants, we see that King County is at about 45% of the total number of utility program participants compared to the total number of unduplicated 2023 SNAP participants. Across, you got 39% in Spokane, 17% in Pierce, 29% in Snohomish, and 24% in Clark County. Now, if you take a look at that duplicate 2023 program participants over the eligible households at 80% of AMI, AMI is greater, first of all, than the 80% of AMI in all these counties is greater than the 200% of federal poverty level requirement under SNAP. So the number of households that are eligible is much greater. And what you see is 23% of eligible households in King County are being served by utility programs in 2023. 30% in Spokane, 13% in Pierce, 14% in Snohomish, and 15% in Clark. These programs do not include, these numbers do not include the donation programs. Those will be in the appendices. The numbers are not significantly different for most of the counties. For some of the rural counties, there is kind of this large discrepancy. And I think it's because the utilities that are operating there often give some of this miscellaneous assistance or donations alongside their bill assistance programs. So we're getting a lot of duplicate counts. It also is, one-time assistance, and I think wouldn't necessarily paint a picture of folks who are receiving more sustained assistance or substantial assistance. But we include those in the appendices of the report, which we will, the draft report, which we'll post on our webpage. If you take the last column, and look at it statewide, that's a statewide utility low-income energy assistance program participation rate of 17% of the eligible population. I can't remember the SNAP number. I think it's about 25. It is 25%. So about for every one participant in a utility program, there are 4 households that are enrolled in SNAP. Challenges across utility programs go beyond income eligibility requirements. We did a survey of utility web pages in March of 2024 and saw a number of different inconsistencies and potential barriers in the applications, enrollment processes, the information that was available about the programs. Benefit levels vary significantly across utilities, and then language access, I think, would be a better thing than language barriers. Not all of the pages are accessible for folks who don't speak English. Now, when we look at pitfalls in social service programs more broadly, there are a number of these that pop up in the utility programs, but are common in the literature. This includes restrictive income eligibility, non-income eligibility requirements, limited funding, incomplete information, time-intensive processes, travel for in-person enrollment, requirements to only, access and enroll in programs online can be a barrier for others. A requirement for a third-party approval, such as a landlord for an energy efficiency or weatherization improvement. And then there's general poverty stigmas and language barriers for folks. And then more structurally, we see problems with programs that have inadequate visibility, where they're not well known. There's not kind of a universal brand available, known to folks. Where we have fragmentation of delivery of services across similar geographies, or in the case of utilities, overlapping service territories. We do see in the literature and in conversations with households and community organizations concerns about broken communication processes. So if you've got lots of different programs operating in similar territory, who's eligible can be, and sharing of word by word of mouth can be confusing for households and lead to unawareness or confusion. The fact that low-income households can be spread out in different ways across area service territories can pose challenges to programs, especially if they themselves are fragmented. And then if you have limited staffing capacity at utilities and community organizations or any social service agency, that it can pose problems to getting folks enrolled in programs because you simply do not have capacity. Um, and so we see these things are common. And in the programs, we've seen some of these already appear in the data that we've looked at. Some of these aren't touched on in the data, but we're going to get into a few of those now. Outreach and enrollment, I will note for utilities, there's relatively few significant changes since our last assessment. There are utilities that are adopting methods that other utilities have used to increase outreach and enrollment. And there are some efforts to kind of upgrade the outreach and enrollment, but they're not significantly different than what other utilities have tried in the past. We do see a few novel approaches. So like Pacific Core is using QR codes on gas station toppers. This is an interesting approach. We do see Snohomish using auto enrollment for housing authorities where households are known to and community organizations that provide housing that have already vetted whether households are low income, as well as tapping into the National School Lunch Programs in Snohomish County. And then we do see some of our utilities taking partnerships with a few multicultural organizations to spread the word and get households served by those organizations enrolled in programs. We saw a little bit of that in the last assessments, but we're seeing a little bit more of it today. All right. Well, my goal is to get through most of this to the additional mechanisms section by 2 o'clock, so I think we're on track. But if people have comments, let's take comments now on anything you've heard. And I see 2 comments in the chat, so I want to get to those. So the first one by Sheila, do the 2020 numbers take into account the additional COVID-based programs that were an anomaly that year? We found some of our utility programs were not utilized when households had needs met by the COVID-based programs. My recollection of that data set is it does include COVID-based programs that utilities provided during that time, and they would have been included in that count. I recall it doesn't include state-funded COVID relief that was not included in the data set for those utility programs because it was a state-funded and administered program. Our households needed our household needs more than usual that year. It's just a strange year to use as a benchmark. I assume that is, you could take that as 2 different ways. You could see, excuse me. I wouldn't say we use 2020 as a benchmark. We did put it in there because it was the most recent date that we have from the past. But we do have 2019 data as well, which is comparable to the 2020 data. And I believe, we could go look at the Section 120 report, from 2023. I believe the 2019 data was slightly bit more program participation. I have to go look. But it was kind of in the same ballpark. So I don't take much into consideration that some of the numbers that we saw, not all of them, but some of them were lower than in 2023 than in 2020. Um, to me, it suggests more that things are hovering around the same level as they were in 2020. Um, so good questions. I don't see any hands raised. Again, I'm looking at my screen here. I've got the other screen here, so feel free to just unmute and ask questions as we go. Um, what we see in this data, we asked utilities in the reporting if they wanted to provide any sort of comments on what they did between the reporting periods. Not everybody chose to take us up on that offer. So uh, the there's I think 6 of them here that didn't provide that information, or 9 of them. It's that third row. But we do kind of get a sense of what folks did. We kind of put into some categories the plans or their reporting on their past actions, and that'll all be included in utility reports. I shared those at our last workshop for public comment. I received a comment from Lewis and a comment Lewis County and a comment from Avista. Vista had theirs kind of adjusted, their future plans adjusted back, and then I think Lewis, as I recall, um, had a low-income senior program added, so we needed to include that here. Um, but I feel good about these categories, but mind you, they are somewhat arbitrary, but you do see distinctions in the different groupings if you look in the appendix. So I think the thing that I call attention to here is that our largest categories, we have utilities making incremental changes. So that can be like tweaking or putting a little bit more funding or effort into outreach into their programs. Maybe they tweak their eligibility criteria a little bit. And so that's about a quarter of the utilities in this group. Then there's about 16% that are just going to maintain their programs. So I should change that. I think that's the planning to maintain programs. They maintain their programs, I think is what that should be. There's no information submitted for 9 of them. We have folks tweaking or retooling programs. So these are like more efforts to do admin work or significantly putting in one new program. That was about 5 utilities, and then the broad and deep reforms. So these are like kind of significant overhauls of programs. There's 4 utilities. 3 of those were the investor-owned utilities, and then one of them was Mason PUD number 3. And then we had 4 that created their first program or programs, and then some that are evaluating what to do. I had 2 that I couldn't figure out what was actually done there, and then 6 of them didn't report by the time I needed the information for the summary. So now if we look at these future plans here, we'll call folks' attention to that these are required under the statute. So the 9 utilities decided not to submit anything about their past actions were required to submit about their future plans. So that puts them more into the mix here. But what you see when you compare these 2 side by side is that it's a similar groupings, utilities kind of move in and out of some of the categories, but the overall numbers remain similar. A lot of folks that are just making incremental changes, maintaining their programs, or evaluating what to do with their programs. We have some that are tweaking and retooling their programs, about 10 of them. And then we have 2 that are doing broad and deep reforms, 1 that is creating their first program. And that's still that same group of 6 that didn't report in by the deadline. And then there is 5 of folks who reported but didn't include any information about their future plans. So I can't evaluate what they plan to do. I guess I could assume they plan to maintain programs, so that could add 5 into that category under that assumption. So that's there. Again, I encourage folks when we post this information tomorrow, the raw data, to go in and look, see if if you feel I miscategorized anything to date. Our advisory group and in the public comment period, we had similar things, or just the 2 edits is what I mean to say, from Lewis and Avista. So. So one final thing, I think there might be one after this. Yeah, thing after this. And then we will move into the additional mechanisms part of our discussion. This is a well talked about issue that was highlighted first in our Section 120 report, but goes back to that DOE lead tool data where we see a disproportionate share of energy burden low-income households in rural areas of the state. The fact that it's a disproportionate share of low-income customers or households in that rate base that is really small creates a risk of rate hikes for households not participating in a utility assistance program if those utility programs were much better at meeting energy assistance need. So the logic there is that there's a lot of folks in need, a lot of low-income households in those areas of the state. The resources needed to meet assistance need, if they're coming from the rate base, would increase rates considerably, which risks pushing more low-income households into needing assistance, which means rates need to go up. And so it creates a challenge for these utilities to meet energy assistance need within their very small rate bases. Whereas our larger utilities have, as a percentage, much fewer low-income households and many more medium to high-income households to spread costs for these programs. Here's just highlight the areas of the state, 4 areas of the state that have the highest percentage of low-income households that are energy burdened. This includes Ferry County, Okanogan County, Skamania County, and San Juan County. And you can see here that the percent of low-income households that are energy burdened is above 64%, or is 64% or above for these 4 at least. There's others that have very significant percentages as well, not as high, but I just grabbed these because they fit well onto this page, but you can go look in the draft report for these. And then you can see that, it's part of their rate base, particularly for the utilities that kind of map onto these counties roughly. It's not a perfect match between county and utility service territory, but what you do see is that a lot of those households are energy burdened. So I see Foster turned on his camera. Foster, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, I do, Esmond. Thanks for recognizing me. I so appreciate it. I'm part of San Juan County, and I almost fall over when I look at the calculation. I've asked before about, well, how do you determine what these figures are? I mean, if you really do the math for our little tiny co-op, it would be somewhere in the 12% rate increase that you'd be looking at for all of our ratepayers, and we only have like 15,000 meters in our service territory. So layering on this whole burden onto the utility is really dramatic, which will drive up the costs even more, which will exacerbate the problem. What's the black box that I've been trying to get a hold of what the calculation is to determine the figures that we're looking at on page 50? What is that?
Oh, that is the DOE lead tool data set. It's posted on our webpage, and I'll post it again with all the materials from today's workshop. And this file, you can go to the DOE lead tool webpage online and Google and look at the numbers, but I find that we just go and ask DOE for the kind of the raw data for Washington State. And so we have a file that we've been posting and updating on our webpage since we started this work. That's easier, I think, for folks to navigate. So you can see that and look at that data. It's based on 5-year American Community Survey data administered by the Census Bureau, which asks the question of, excuse me, what is your last month's bill for home energy costs? They put a number in as a household. And then what DOE does, it extrapolates that over the course of a year. And then they, as I think about it, they smooth the data using utility reported data about their revenues so that you kind of eliminate any of the extremely highs or extremely low costs that are outliers to make sure that it matches the total revenue of the rate base or revenues of the utility. So that's the source of the data, a little bit of the background. Our report will kind of detail the information there. But that's
Yeah,
how we get here.
yeah. I guess my observation is when you actually get into the detail, I'm going to just label it as a big giant black box, because so when you actually get into how everything is calculated, it's a big giant mystery. You never get to the point where it's clear like you just kind of described. And again, there's a lot of variables that are not listed in there, so you can't really come up with the equation that goes along with it. So you can track it to find out if it's even accurate. We did our own needs assessment not that long ago and determined, the low income programs, and they were nowhere near where you guys are on this. And a lot of it has to do with that calculation. It's kind of a mystery to us. We did also send comments. I just sent them back to you. We sent in comments for the low income program back in June, I think it was. Anyway, I just forwarded those to you again with a CC and a couple other people, because we take it very serious. We have really good, robust programs, and the way that this is turning out is really going to be challenging for our little co-op, and we do such a tremendous job trying to take care of our low income members. Certainly during the pandemic, we've done a good job. I am in the email I just sent you. I don't know if you want to share it with anyone. You can see what we've been doing during the pandemic and the programs that we currently have in play. And I don't see us referenced anywhere in the data that you have. So thanks for your help, Boston, to get that information out.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it, Foster. And this definitely, I think of this data as kind of taking a temperature of energy assistance need by putting your finger in and testing the how warm the water is per se. It's not very precise. we do see that the data for most of the utilities is in line with their rates, and in some cases lower given recent rate increases. But yeah, no, this is a complex problem with somewhat difficult data that we're grappling with. So
Yeah, I guess a couple other comments, and let's get back to it. We did our needs assessment. We figured we were around the 300 to 400 members of our community, our little co-op that are out here. When we actually went through the additional $200 that was given out by Department of Commerce, we're really active. We want to make sure we get those dollars in the hands of our members, and we passed out probably about 1,000 of $200, and people were really, really supportive. We spent a lot of time trying to get that money out. So when I look at a number here that's double what we really just try to get out there, it seems like I hope these things aren't based on some lore, and that all of our programs are going to be subject to this, because they're really out of line from what we experience in our county. And I don't know if you guys have a really good handle on what's going on in our individual communities, but thanks for trying us.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Foster. All right. We'll keep moving along. I did see a comment from Jacob Henry. How do programs like SNAP deal with the rural dilemma, funding dilemma? SNAP is a federal program administered by the state with federal dollars. So they don't, those are tax dollars nationally. So they're not set up where the funding is coming, from a very localized source to pay for disproportionate need in those particular areas. It's costs are spread out. All right. So I'm just going to highlight three main gaps in statutes. We spent a lot of time talking about this. But just some observations that, the three laws that we talked about at the very beginning, none of them are aimed at providing statewide monthly energy assistance programs, or making sure there's comparable benefits to similarly situated households served by different utilities. You have one statute in Section 120 that does not require bill assistance or monthly bill assistance, more specifically. And then you have another statute that is aimed solely at the investor-owned utilities that has resulted in monthly energy bill assistance programs for those customers of those utilities. There are no statutory goals specific to household outcomes, such as program participation rates. And there are no requirements for utilities to conduct third-party data-driven low-income energy assistance need assessments. Now, some of them have brought on consultants to do that work, but most of what we get in terms of the reports tend not to be as quantitative in focus. So that's been a challenge in looking at the data and in measuring progress, I should say, and improving programs ultimately for low-income households. So we are at 2:10, and I think that we should take a 5-minute break. So everyone, rush to the restroom if you haven't taken a break, or stretch, do something good for your body. And we will be back at 2:15, where we will go through some additional mechanisms of assistance. I'll describe some of the things we see as an agency in evaluating different approaches, and we'll discuss those before moving to funding mechanisms and thinking about some overall findings. So appreciate everyone's participation, for being able to go with me through 53 slides in a little over an hour. You guys are champs. So I'll see you guys around 2:16. Thanks all. All right. Let's reconvene everyone. I don't know if anyone's participated in any of the utility market conversations, but they have they're done by the Southwest. Some of them are done by the Southwest Power Pool for Marcus Plus. And when those are in person, the people from Arkansas that come up, they got bladders of steel. They go for like 3 hours straight in person, no bathroom breaks. Kills me. But anyways, uh, hopefully you all got a bathroom break in and stretch. We're going to talk a little bit about additional mechanisms of assistance. I tend to think of first breaking these into two different tracks. One is around program design, two different ways of approaching the problem. One is focused, it's a utility by utility approach, which is similar to today, where utilities are responsible under law for addressing the energy burdens. And then you can layer additional policies on top of the existing ones to try and strengthen protections for low-income households, or try and add additional funding to increase participation. And of course, over those utilities programs, there's the federal LIHEAP program and a few small statewide programs where you could also try and push more funding through to increase the availability of assistance. So that's in this group. And then there's a statewide approach, which is where instead of administering programs on a utility by utility basis, the state administers low income energy bill assistance on a monthly, like based on a monthly program, which would be different from LIHEAP. So we'll talk about that approach. And then so you got these two different kind of approaches, different designs potentially to consider, and then you have a discussion about funding mechanisms. How would you fund either a utility by utility approach or a statewide approach? And we will take a look at a summary of those different funding options and their different trade-offs that are presented when we look at them. So let's dive in. So the first idea comes out of seeing the high participation rates in SNAP and other statewide programs compared to the utilities. And, can't we just send that information to the utilities so that they can be enrolled, those households can be enrolled in their utility programs? And so challenges there's some potential gaps that exist when doing with that idea. The first is that there's federal prohibitions on sharing data I think for most statewide programs with significant household participation, such as SNAP. It's this gets the lawyers involved around privacy protections and other things. So that can be a real challenge. There is potential, I think, for more data sharing across some of the smaller programs, but again, that requires a fair amount of lawyering that could establish that. It does not solve, just strictly data sharing does not solve the problem of having programs that are not open to all low-income customers. It doesn't address the different benefit amounts low-income households receive from different utilities. Um, Similar to the universal access one, it doesn't solve different enrollment processes and eligibility requirements or different communications across service territories, particularly those that are overlapping. Um, it doesn't change the slippage we see in implementing state laws. Um, where the state passes things and we're 5 years in and don't see state law definitions being implemented in programs. And it doesn't help the rural utilities that would likely struggle to pay for these programs without significant rate hikes. So looking at this approach on its own is it's still got some gaps that would need to be addressed. I don't know if anyone has comments. This is intended for conversation. If folks think these are right, if folks think these need revision, questions about how we're looking at these. Admittedly, it's a lot to digest, so that's why there's a public comment period. All right, now we will take a look at another approach, one that we heard previously over the past few years, where why doesn't the state, such as Commerce, conduct outreach and community engagement for electric utilities? So that would provide kind of a statewide presence, tap into those different networks. I think, primarily, there's a real complexity to communicating details of over 50 plus utility programs and sending households to service providers to potentially look for resources that may not exist because programs are not available in some places in the state. There's a funding issue of how the agency would do that work on behalf of utilities. And then kind of that list of things that we saw on that last slide, where there's just challenges with the fragmentation of programs that would make outreach pretty darn difficult to be effective, folks. Another idea is to layer on additional statutory requirements. So this is where you try to patch gaps on a utility by utility basis through legislation that applies to all the utilities. An example of that would be kind of take the models that we've seen over at the investor-owned utility programs under that other law, provide those tiered bill discounts that are targeted to meeting energy assistance need, ensure programs are open to all households, establish benefit levels for each tier that comply with a standard methodology, standard data-driven assessments at utilities, streamlined enrollment, conducting significant outreach and submitting annual reports on outreach efforts, which is required under that other statute. Coordinating programs with community-based organizations, specifically those serving historically marginalized communities. reporting on program participation rates, and probably needing to set in place some statutory program participation levels that start by trying to match SNAP participation, because we know those households are low income and they participate in social service programs and should be eligible for utility assistance. Remembering that there's many households above the SNAP income eligibility requirements that would be eligible for utility programs. The gaps with this one would depend on the comprehensiveness and the specificity of the law. Absent, something to specifically look at, it's hard to know. There is potential inefficiencies. I think there's clearly inefficiencies, potential for slippage, and communication challenges with implementing 50 plus monthly energy bill assistance programs across all the utilities. And there remains this question of how rural utilities with a disproportionate share of low-income households would develop and fund programs without substantial increase in rates. Okay, no comments on this one. So Foster mentioned the Washington Families Clean Energy Credit Program. This was a $200 bill credit that was provided on a one-time basis to households, particularly for transportation costs as well as home costs, but it was certainly not expressly for energy burden for low-income households. In fact, the credit was open to households above 80% of AMI. But the idea here is utilities would put a reoccurring credit on a bill that would be meant to address energy burden that comes from the household heating and cooling costs. First, there are some gaps in, the data that we could use to help address this. It's not just like the Washington Families Clean Energy Credit Program wasn't able to access SNAP data that would carry over, but you potentially would have other households that could be tapped into using data that the state has. We must acknowledge that the first time the implementation was not limited to low-income households, so that would have to be modified. This approach does not address home energy assistance need. It's just a flat base amount. It doesn't take into account variations in household energy consumption. And this approach still doesn't address the need of low-income households to have other forms of sustained assistance, like a monthly bill discount program, and doesn't necessarily help our rural utilities, even though it does lower probably the costs. So I'll stop there. I see Foster's come off.
Yeah, is this going to be funded through the Climate Commitment Act? I know that's on the ballot. Is there any thoughts there?
Yeah, that's a good question. The Climate Commitment Act is one funding source that exists potentially today for energy assistance. As you mentioned, if the Climate Commitment Act is repealed by a voter initiative, it would not be a source of funding. You would be looking to either a state funded out of like the state general fund, where you would be competing with other state priorities to fund low-income energy assistance. You could, I'm guessing, I haven't thought about this, but you could apply a system benefits charge where there's a uniform amount percentage that utilities pay in, and then that amount goes into a fund for what would be this program. Ostensibly, it would not be a utility rate payer funded program, but I guess it could. But I'm sure folks would have concerns about that as well, hitting a rate basis.
Yeah, I know that we're in that category just because we have such few meters. The other thing that was really we struggled with, it had a whole self-reporting for the income verification section. So that was always a challenge, just trying to figure out, because we don't have the administrative ability to verify household size or income and so forth, and it seems to be, I don't know, prone to challenges. I'll say that.
Great. Thanks, Foster.
Hey, Austin.
Hi,
Liz
Liz.
Anderson here. Quick question. If this were to be state funded, and I thought you brought up a really good point that you'd have to compete for funding. What measures, or how would you make sure that the funding for this is sustainable over the long term, given the competition for state money?
I think that's a great question. You can create a dedicated fund for it, but it can be difficult to make sure in that state general fund that the year after year the appropriations are made to have funding in that pool. And so that's a challenge with state general fund dollars. So.
And that would be true with CCA funding as well.
I think so, except to me, when I look at the CCA funding, there's an explicit call out. I remember, I don't know if I actually showed the slide, but a long, long time ago on one of our calls, I had this slide of like the 27 things you can use CCA dollars for. And it's a long list, but one of those is energy assistance. And so it is called out at least, and it's a narrower list of competing priorities. And I think you would have a better shot at keeping that in there because it's not competing with other social service program funding, but it does always have concerns that the allocations aren't made. That's a challenge. And we can get at that when we get into the funding piece too. Again, this is assuming that utilities still have their other programs. This is just kind of layering an approach and supplementary funding perhaps on top of that, the existing set of programs that are set out in section 120. Another idea is energy rebates. So this is very similar, I think, in a way to what we just discussed, where there's a rebate provided to households for their home energy costs on an annual or monthly basis. Again, I think, with Foster's comment, this first one could be, more about income verification, knowing which households are low income and restrictions on using data for that. Energy rebates are presumably kind of grants in a way, and that there's like a fixed amount. So it doesn't really account for need. It doesn't account for varying household energy consumption, which might not be something that a household necessarily can control. That if the rebates are provided on an annual basis. There would not be universal access to monthly bill assistance. And if they were provided on a monthly basis, it could be exceptionally costly in terms of the administration, processing payments. So there's some trade-offs here under this approach. Again, this is a supplementary approach to what is under Section 120. And then there's this the idea of adding funding to LIHEAP. LIHEAP is the federal program. Commerce administers it. It's a grant-based program. Households make appointments to get this funding, and then the funding is deposited on their accounts on a one-time basis. They gotta reapply the following year once the funding's exhausted. Because it's a grant, once it's exhausted, so it doesn't necessarily provide a sustained, it certainly doesn't provide sustained assistance for households in meeting their need. Some of the gaps here with LIHEAP 1 are the eligibility requirements. It's set at 150% of the federal poverty level. So it's really targeted at the lowest income households. It doesn't adjust for cost of living in Washington or in different Washington communities. Excuse me. As I mentioned, meeting home energy costs after the grant is exhausted can be a challenge. And there are often limited enrollment opportunities for the program, which can be a challenge for households. Hi, Glenn. All right. We're at 2:40. We're doing good. So now we're going to talk about the statewide monthly low-income energy assistance program design. This is different from the utility by utility approach. See a lot of familiar names here that are probably familiar that the legislature in the 2023 budget proviso directed Commerce to recommend a design of a statewide low-income energy assistance program that was open to all low-income households and is aimed at meeting energy assistance need. It's important to kind of go back to the reasons they asked for this recommended program design. This is because of that high level of energy assistance need, the low participation rates across programs, and how the fragmentation of programs can pose challenges to accessing resources, as well as for our utilities to meet the need with their varying levels of resources. So this design, was developed with input of more than 300 low-income households and nearly 100 community organizations from across Washington, and it incorporates the principles that were created over 9 workshops with utilities and statewide advocacy organizations. And we consulted statewide social service program administrators and national experts and best practices around social services, and did a good amount of work, I would say, with community organizations and households in shaping the more human-centered design of the program so that it would be easily accessible and for them. The goals, is to make sure that we have something that in the design that would be efficient, equitable, provide quality services for low-income households when it comes to monthly energy bill assistance, and that it target energy assistance need. And so the next few slides here, I think, will, just that we also wanted to recognize here that people, our low-income households, should not have to work hard to identify and access assistance, and that a program meet the needs of the diverse people of Washington and ensure that they have equal access to resources. So I'm going to go through a couple of the design elements at a fairly high level. Our report will be issued on this hopefully soon. But I'm drawing on the material that we provided in our last draft report, and that's available. So this is not giving away any real spoilers here. It's just a reminder of what has been previously discussed. So of course, this would have the recommended design would provide that universal access to monthly bill assistance with uniform benefits for similarly situated households. For instance, households at a certain income level across utility service territories. The program would have a name, a brand to improve the visibility of the program for low-income households and community organizations. It would maintain the income eligibility under existing law and administrative rule, which accounts for the differences in the cost of living across the state. The benefit levels would be tiered based on income, with the benefit amounts targeting what is needed to meet energy assistance need in those income tiers. That's similar to what the investor-owned utilities do today. It would be a graduated benefit level, which would decrease as household incomes rise. No sudden drops in benefits due to arbitrary income thresholds, and it would preserve the existing bill discount rates for households if they are higher than the statewide program, which I think would, there may be a few of those out there, but not a lot, I don't think, given how few monthly bill assistance programs exist. There would be consistent communication and program eligibility, which will help with folks sharing by word of mouth or giving direct referrals to a program. Hey, it's all the same set of eligibility criteria, yada, yada, go here. There would be no wrong door for assistance. Households could enroll online, over the phone, in person, at any community organization offering assistance to low-income households. Program would deliberately and intentionally seek to expand existing relationships and forge new ones with households and community organizations, create communications and outreach plans that meet the needs of our local communities, and it would support the education about the benefits of conservation and help connect households to other social services and energy programs, such as energy efficiency and weatherization. And then the program has embedded in it different metrics to track equitable access, delivery of the benefit to the household, and making sure that the program has compassionate integrity, which means that it is serving the people that is intended to serve, and has good program participation rates relative to other statewide programs and the eligible population. The goal of the design is to reduce the inefficiencies of administering more than 50 separate bill assistance programs across Washington Electric Utilities to rationalize and simplify the existing policy layers and processes across utilities, and to bring to bear new resources and increase awareness and accessibility. So for our utilities, in particular, which I know there's a lot on this call, this graph kind of shares an illustrative version of what the program design would look like. So the household would be enrolling, be being input into a system managed by the state administrator, but it could be at a low income or community organization, I should say. It could be that they're enrolling online or over the phone, and the utility receives a notice, through a system that they need to apply a certain discount percentage to the household bill. The utility would bill the state administrator for the discounted amount. This depends on how it would work, but it could be that they're billing the state administrator at the time that they're billing the customer. So there's really no difference there. You would remove the discount upon change in customer service or notice that the household is no longer eligible. Post information about it, advertise it, and provide customers notice if they fall behind on their payments, that they may be eligible for assistance through the program. Utilities would not have to design and administer their own programs under this statewide design. They wouldn't have to conduct program assessments and evaluations, verify household incomes, develop program materials, conduct in their own independent outreach and enrollment campaigns unless desired. Aside from the few little pieces on the other side here around, doing a little bit of awareness, but nothing as contemplated under current law. They would not be responsible for the energy burdens beyond the utilities book of business. So, the state administrator would be the one who's using the bill assistance program to try and bring those down. And the utilities would not be responsible for program outcomes in the bill assistance program. That would be a state administered program. So I'll stop there. Glenn, do you have anything to add?
I do not. Thank you.
I see there's some comments in the chat. We'll talk about a system benefits charge, Kelly, and the funding mechanism piece. So let's all that. Foster talks about, I think I understand this comment to be saying that there's utilities under existing law right now. They state requires them to include in their energy burden work the cost of and burdens from propane, wood, and other sources. And if a statewide program includes that, could be incentivizing the use of those fuels. And so a statewide program would have to reconcile with how to address those fuel sources. And this is more comments about the funding piece, which we can have a conversation about. Liz Anderson says, which agency do you envision would administer this program? There's no agency that's designated in the recommended design as administering the program. It seems like it would be between DSHS and Commerce But that is not determined in the recommended design. All right, we'll keep going. Okay, funding mechanisms. So the statute requires Commerce to look at different funding mechanisms, including system benefits charge, public funds, private funds. I think those are the ones that are discussed in the statute. So to focus kind of on the main ones, there's the rate base, which is the way most programs are funded right now. On an individual utility by utility basis. This tends not to address, it doesn't address the rural utility dilemma that we've discussed, or multiple fuel sources. And each utility pays for energy assistance programs for its customers. Then there's the climate commitment account, which we had discussed briefly, and the state general fund as both being public sources of funding. Both of these avoid the rate base. Climate commitment account is particularly well suited for supplementing other funding sources, and has fewer priorities to compete against compared to the state general fund. Both require legislative appropriations. The Climate Commitment Act has fluctuations in cap and invest revenues, as we know, and there can be cyclical dynamics in the state general fund where less tax dollars come in certain years than others. And as we mentioned previously, the CCA, may be repealed here in November. So that would eliminate it as a potential option. And then the last one is the system benefits charge. This avoids a legislative appropriation. It does need to be enacted by the legislature, though. It spreads costs across high and low income areas of the state. The system benefits charge is difficult as well to include for non-utility energy, such as firewood and propane. Some other things to note is that everyone contributes to low-income energy assistance under system benefits charge. There's a potential net transfer of funds from some utilities to other utilities. And it's uncertain if households served by utilities providing the most energy assistance today would spend more under system benefits charge or less, in part because the percentage for a system benefits charge would, of course, need to be determined. And, the amounts that utilities are spending certainly vary from one utility to the next as a percentage of their revenue. I'll stop there. Well, Liz, we can't hear you, or I can't hear you at least.
Sorry. On
Okay.
system benefits charge under drawbacks, I'm wondering if it wouldn't be appropriate, since this was brought up, I think, in earlier comments, that there's the potential for the rate impacts on the rest of customers, especially those who are right on the margin. They may not qualify for low income assistance, but we're really kind of moving them into that category and putting some real pressure on customers who are already feeling pressure, but they're not eligible.
That's a good one that we need to have on. Thanks, Liz. Josh,
Did you
yeah,
pay Josh's question?
yeah. Do you want to take it, Glenn, or do you want?
I can try. We'll see. I think the idea is that with a system benefit charge, one way to think about it would be that all the customers are contributing and some of the customers are receiving benefits. But, some people like utilities might look at it by saying, well, if you just look at my customers, how much are they contributing and how much are they receiving? And so that utility level comparison of net payments or net benefits raises concern from some utilities. And of course, it's and their customers, I would say. So it's an issue that's come up with the systems benefit charge is, is it okay to move money from one group of customers to another group of customers? Looking at that at the level of the utility instead of at the level of the customer. How'd I do, Austin?
I think that's pretty good.
What do you think, Josh? He said thanks.
So Austin, I want to add one more thing on the drawbacks for just all of these. I think the concern again is sustainability of the funding and making sure that funding cannot be used for any other purpose, really specifying its use and protecting its use. So I think that's questionable and a drawback.
Yeah, thanks, Liz. Write that down. Okay. Wow, we have gone through a lot. We are, that's not surprising because we've covered a lot of this before with, now we have new data, some cases, but these are some preliminary thoughts we wanted to, in particular, um, throw out for discussion um, and have folks chime in on. So we don't have really a lot of content other than to share that these are some things that we've been thinking. We're not sure if they match folks' experiences or thoughts. So we're hoping to get your guys' reflections as well on these three areas. So from our data, we're not seeing significant progress in reducing energy burden and enrolling households in utility programs statewide. There's certainly increase in program participation. In the last year, we've heard some of that in some of our prior calls, but the gap between the program participation in utility programs and SNAP and the out of the eligible population as a whole is still remains very large. Our second observation is that there are significant constraints right now on the existing utility by utility approach that limit the capacity to scale programs to serve households. These can be constraints that vary on a utility by utility basis. But there's also some common challenges across everyone. And then the current laws on the books may be too vague to drive significant progress across the 50 plus utilities in the state. This seems particularly true for Section 120. But there are some gaps in the IOU laws as well. um, that the legislature has not addressed. So leave that there. I don't know, Glenn, if you have anything else to add on these or context.
No, I don't think I do.
I'll just open it up there. Josh.
Yeah, thanks. I wouldn't disagree with these preliminary thoughts, particularly the second and third one. The first one, however, within the law, again, it was 60% by 2030 and 90% by 2050, and here we are at 2024 making pretty strong, thoughts on whether or not we're making significant progress when we still have a long ways to go to meet the targets of the law.
Yeah, and Josh, you're referring to the funding level targets in the statute, right? Which are uh, roughly like 60% of utilities need to have 60% of energy assistance need like funding available by 2030. And by 2050, it's 90% of current energy assistance need funding available. That's what you're referring to, right?
That's right, yeah.
And I think here we're looking at the burden amounts and the program participation as metrics. But I don't know, Glenn, do you have any thoughts on those?
Well, I think it's always a little hard to judge whether progress has been significant or not. It does feel like we're kind of halfway to 2030 from 2019. I mean, I also acknowledge this is, the data that we're using here is a year old, but I guess I would invite people who are seeing significant progress to highlight that for us. And we'll do our best to highlight it in the report. But, we also want to make sure that they're aware in terms of the number of households who are receiving a benefit, how the energy burden amounts are changing or not changing, some things like that I just don't want to convey the message that we're halfway there if we're not halfway there.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I do want to say, I can speak on behalf of Chelan and other utilities that I've spoken with. We're working hard to develop programs, but it takes time, right? As you guys know, but we are seeing some significant progress that has not been reported, and I think that other utilities would say the same. So,
Well, and maybe there's some program development work that, things that are about to happen or in the process, things like that we should be identifying, as well as the more of a trailing indicator that is the amounts of enrollment and benefits received, things like that.
I think that would make sense. Yeah.
So everyone who wants to submit those in public comments will get them and put them in report. We've started our first meeting with requests for that information. We'll continue that through the last workshop, and then this will be the third time that we ask for more information around that. So be good to get it in. If it's not in the future plans that utilities have already reported to us, which I would assume include those changes, but maybe some things weren't reported. Other thoughts? Glenn, can you still see my screen?
Yeah.
Okay, good. I moved my screen over and got confused myself. Any other thoughts? Our next slide goes to kind of next steps and things. So if there's other things that people have on their minds, this would be a good time to add those into the chat or into the conversation.
Hi, Austin. This is Michaela with Avista.
Hey, Michaela.
Sort of in the same vein of what was just commented on as far as, are we sure these are not effective programs that exist? I guess I'm wondering if an existing program is proven successful, could it not be funded by the state instead of ratepayers in lieu of a state designed program? I just hate to do all the work to set our customers up for success and then have to kind of give them whiplash and put them into this other program.
What do you think of that, Glenn?
I think it's worth the legislature's consideration. It's we were asked to develop a design for a statewide program, but that doesn't mean that the legislature couldn't pick parts of that concept and apply it, in some other way, including one where if utility programs are meeting, some objective standards for performance and such, that the legislature might say, let's keep that and help pay for it.
And Glenn, you had a funding idea that we've circulated in past reports where they basically the idea has been that if utilities exceed 5% of their state revenues, 5% of their revenues, that the rest can be, as I recall, written off in the public utility tax funded by the state. And that 5% number comes from the investor-owned utility law, which says authorizes the UTC to approve assistance up to 5% of the revenue amount. So that would be one way in which successful programs could be funded with state dollars. And it's already somewhat laid out in existing statute, aside from the public utility tax part.
Yeah, I do remember us talking about that along the way. Essentially, it's one, if the legislature decided to support utility programs, that meet certain standards, that one way to do that would be through the tax system and to provide credits to utilities for them to fund their programs and keep the ratepayer funded portion to some reasonable objective level.
And I think the gaps, going back to the slides where we had the different alternative mechanisms and gaps, that supplementary funding piece, that it's not addressing, the program fragmentation or the different challenges that households may be facing if they're not one of those utility customers, and still would be more inefficient in terms of the time and staffing and everything else. If you ran 50+ programs with the supplemental state funding at that 5% threshold, then perhaps dealing with it in a more uniform basis. But it is an option. Okay, I don't know. Does anyone else have any thoughts?
Hey, Austin, could you just tell us where the report is right now to the recommendation for the statewide program design is right now?
Um,
Choking Austin up.
yes. Um, it's out the door of Commerce and in the hands of the Office of Financial Management. They do a review process on it, and I don't know how long that will take, etc. So, but it's left our hands. Then been busy drafting the this one, and we'll continue working on that. Get those comments in and send it over to OFM and face the same black box of when is that report ever going to get published? So,
Thanks.
okay. If no one has any comments now on any part of the presentation today, we'll keep moving along, and I'll let folks think if they have anything else before we close out. But in the meantime, we'll take a look at next steps. So we're gonna post the report materials tomorrow on our webpage. It'll be right at the top of the webpage for folks. I just want to clean up a few things so that it's not necessarily the draft, but the supporting files are easier to read. As I mentioned, we still got to clean up a few different of the utility reports in there. So it's not final materials, but they are pretty much close to final. So please take a look over them. We'll have a public comment period to Tuesday, November 5th. Please submit any updates to your programs, anything you want to add to your future plans that you reported back in March. Please give that to us. We will include it in the future plans piece of the report and call attention to any sort of successes you've had, whether it's increasing in program participation rates, any other metrics that your utility uses to evaluate the success of your programs. We really want to hear those and put those in the report for the legislature. So please, once again, submit those in public comment, as well as any comments on the draft report and the materials, the data aggregation, etc., that will be available on the webpage. That's what I got. This is the last one of these workshops, and I've seen many folks have been on these calls a lot over the last few years, and I just really appreciate everybody and all their input over this time. It's been a lot of work that everyone has done to pull these things together, and I really appreciate everybody's contributions. Here's our final slide with contact information. I should say, need to update this. Amelia is no longer with us, but the rest of these contacts are still all around. If you're interested in talking more about this topic with us, feel free to reach out.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone, and I hope you have a good rest of your week. Don't get sick. All right. Bye now.